Okay, everybody. Right now we're going to do the Imperialism in Japan notes. It looks like this. It's the third sheet in your green packet. If we were doing this in class, we would pause at various times. You would do these, you can see right here in the middle of the screen, these critical thinking decisions, and you would choose an option, and then I would tell you what option the Japanese actually chose. So as we do this, please, as we go, just pause. Do this at your own pace. Obviously in class, you might be doing it with a partner. Could possibly take a little longer here or there. But just pause it when we get to that point, and I'll tell you, obviously, in the notes. And then we'll, unpause and keep going with the notes, okay? All right, so we are going to look at the impact of Western countries imperializing Japan, okay? You see Japan here is in the Pacific Ocean, okay, close to Korea, close to China, and Japan is an island nation. So they don't have a lot of countries connected to them or regions connected to them that they can get resources from. So in about the mid 1500s is when Japan is going to see Europeans arriving there to either trade or sell their goods. And at first, Japan's really going to enjoy this. They're fascinated by the military. They're fascinated by the technology. This is not something that they would have just gotten onto Instagram and seen. This is stuff that unless people come to their country or the Japanese go to another country, they're not going to see. They're not going to experience. So things are going really well at first. However, there is a conversion of Christianity. Remember that whole religious motive. The Japanese are being converted to Christianity. And so the shogun or the leader of Japan is going to ban Christianity because he was concerned that that was, harming his people. And so over time, the shogunate Tokugawa is going to ban all foreign merchants and missionaries to Japan, basically just going to close the borders. Closed country policy. It's not going to be 100% closed country, but pretty close closed country for about 200 years. And so they will keep one port open to the Dutch and the Chinese. And the Chinese, because they're such a close neighbor. The Dutch, because they will share ideas, but not try to convert the people to Christianity. And so the Japanese people will appreciate that. They'll appreciate what they share with them. And so they'll allow them to continue coming to Japan. And they do it to learn about Western ideas. So ideas that are happening in Europe. Okay, so the Dutch are going to teach the Japanese about science, about the industrial world. You can see the microscope, anatomy, a battery, steam engine. We talked about that during the Industrial Revolution unit, railroads, steamboats. Okay, so Japan has been isolated for nearly 200 years, a little bit over 200 years. And the rest of Asia is being imperialized by Western powers. We've already talked about China and India. They're being imperialized. Japan's just isolated. And so as time goes, these countries right here, Britain, France, Russia, and the US, are going to want to trade with Japan. Again, when countries are isolated, that makes other countries want to trade, seems like, even more. The Japanese continue to refuse. So it's going to be the U.S. that's eventually going to get the Japanese to eventually trade. Commodore Matthew Perry, not to be confused with the Friends actor Matthew Perry, comes into Tokyo Harbor with these well-armed, well-advanced steamships and demands that the Japanese trade with the U.S. The Japanese had never really seen anything like this. This was shocking. This was scary. They weren't really sure what was happening or what to do. Okay, so this is where you should read the critical thinking decision. Go ahead and pause it. Do it. Actually pause it right now. Read it. And then decide what the Japanese should do. Okay. Hopefully you paused it. Hopefully you chose one of the options. Hopefully you chose option C. The Japanese are going to realize they're overpowered and agree to trade with the Americans. They were overmatched by the U.S. Navy ships. They signed a treaty and they opened their ports to the American merchants. And so this is going to have an impact on Japan and Japan's development because they're going to, learn a lot and gain a lot from their relationship with the United States. And so by 1860, obviously England, France, the Dutch, the US, they're all going to want to trade in Japan as well. And so the US opens that door, other countries follow right through that door and start trading with the Japanese. All right, a lot of the Japanese people were pretty angry that the shogun or the leader had allowed the foreigners to come in, and they were afraid they'd become like China. Remember, China had gotten taken over, and basically all these European countries were just trading there. Japan did not want to become powerless like that. So eventually, the shogun, realizing he has lost the acceptance of his people, steps down, and it ends 600 years of military dictatorship in Japan. So Emperor Mudashito, or I can never say this, Mutsuhito, takes control of the government, and he calls it the Meiji or the Meiji enlightened ruler. So we're going to talk about the Meiji restoration. So go ahead and look at this critical thinking decision here. It's on the bottom of the front and top of the back. Like last time, actually read it. Take a second, pause the video, do it for real. All right, so hopefully you really paused it. Hopefully you chose an option, and hopefully the option you chose was B, which was Japan's going to sit here and look at this like a cafeteria line, and they're going to look at all these Western nations, and they're going to take what they like. So they're going to go, I like your military, I like your government, I like your style of dress. I'm going to take all of that, put it together, and bing, bang, boom, we're going to come up with a great industrialized nation. So the Meiji Emperor realized, listen, if you can't beat them, join them. Let's find out what the Western world is doing well, and let's adapt it. So they went to Europe, they went to America, they studied Western ways. They liked Germany's government, so they took that and they used that. They liked the industrialization. They liked the modern factories they saw around the world. They liked the railroads, the steamships. They liked the bridges that they saw being built with steel. Again, this all goes back to the Industrial Revolution. They liked the militaries of Germany, and they liked the Navy of Britain. So they said, okay, let's do what Germany and Britain are doing. They liked the style of fighting that other countries were modeling. And you see that in some of the pictures here. They liked the schooling in Germany, America, and France, and so they adapted some of the schooling there as well and reformed the school systems in Japan. As well as fashion. Western fashion became popular throughout Japan. And so Japan's really going to reform themselves. They're really going to add a lot of ideas from the Western world, and they're going to see quite a bit of change. Okay, so this leads us to our final kind of decision making. This shows you all of the changes that happened during the Meiji Reform or Meiji Restoration. So Japan becomes industrial, they become militarized. It's a ways away from this time period, but we see that during World War II. Japan's a major player for the Axis powers. They've got railroads, they've got goods to sell and trade. They've got a modern army and navy. They have respect to the Western world, but they don't have colonies. Europe's got colonies. Japan, they didn't get colonized. They got stronger, but now they want to go out and trade themselves. So go ahead and look at critical thinking decision number 3. Like I said, do it. Actually read it. Make a choice. Pause the video. Okay. Hopefully you paused it. Hopefully you came back. Hopefully you made a choice, and hopefully you chose D. Basically, Japan's going to say, listen, we're going to look for imperial territories too. Britain, France, England, that's Britain. I guess I've already said that. Germany, go out and find these colonies. Heck, we're Japan. We're just as good as they are. We should do that too. So they're going to need raw materials. Obviously, if you look at the map, again, being an island, it's not like they can just invade their neighbor. But they do have some countries close to them that they look at, and they look to China. in Korea. Korea right here, if you follow the mouse, had always been claimed by the Chinese. But the Japanese are really close. They said, you know what? We want to have some control there. So they go to Korea. They attack the Chinese. It's called the Sino-Japanese War. It does not last very long. Japan is much more advanced than the Chinese are, and it's a quick war. Japan defeats the Chinese army, destroys their navy, and Japan now gets spheres of influence of trade in China, just like we talked about with the US, Britain, France, other European countries, and they get Taiwan, this country down here. Okay, so Japan's starting to expand their empire. And this just shows the difference between the Japanese here on the left, the Chinese on the right, and how, they were fundamentally similar to Westerners, but actually very different when you broke it down and compare the two cultures at that time. So now a rivalry is going to start between Japan and Russia. Russia's sitting over here like, hang on a second, Japan. We see you in Korea. We see you in Taiwan. We see you in China, but we don't want to see you in Russia. And this control over this region right here, the Port Arthur Port in Manchuria, a war starts between the two. Now, Russia had a modern military. Russia had a modern navy. And so it shocks the world, really, that Japan is able to defeat the Russians. It's an underdog story. Right here you see the world looking at Russia as superior and Japan as much inferior. A year later, you see the Japanese looking much more superior and the Russian looking much more inferior. The U.S. has a little bit of a hand in this. Teddy Roosevelt will help draft the treaty that Korea goes to Japan and removes Russia from Manchuria. So actually, if you go back just real quick, Japan would now have control over Taiwan down here, trading rights in China, Korea, and then Manchuria region of China that Russia had been originally in. This sets Japan as a dominant force in Asia. Western nations will now really rely on Japan to kind of keep order in Asia. They'll look at Japan as an ally. That won't always be true in the future. Obviously, World War II will happen. But then after World War II, Japan becomes Western nations' allies once again. So you see that there. Japan will want to imperialize again. That will be a major cause of their involvement in World War II. But then after World War II is over, treaties will be signed, relationships will be repaired, and Japan will become an ally once again. Okay, guys, hopefully that doesn't confuse you too much. If you have questions, as always, let me know. Don't worry about doing this. If you want to do it for review, fine, but no need to. This shows you just a comparison between the two and what they both did. So obviously a little bit of a Venn diagram. All right, that's all about Japan. Hopefully all's going well. Reach out if you have questions.